Welcome to this meeting of the Partnership Cabinet on Wednesday, the 26th of February 2025. My name is Councillor Simon Werner and I'll be chairing the meeting. The meeting is being held in person at York House, Windsor, and via Zoom, being streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees in the meeting that participation indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. First, shall we all introduce ourselves as Cabinet members? As I said, I'm Simon Werner and I'm Leader of the Council.
Good evening, Councillor Lynn Jones, Deputy Leader and Lead Member for Finance.
Good evening, Councillor Mark Wilson, Lead Member for Corporate Services.
Good evening, Councillor Jeff Hill, Lead Member for Highways and Transport.
Councillor Richard Coe, Lead Member for Household and Regulatory Services.
Hello, Councillor Amy Teasey, Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Windsor.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Jack Douglas, I'm Cabinet Member for Communities and Leisure.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Adam Burmand and I'm Cabinet Member for Planning, Governance and Asset Management.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Karen Davis. I'm Lead Member for Climate, Biodiversity and Windsor Town Council.
I'm Catherine Del Campo, Cabinet Member for Adult Services, Health, Housing and Equalities.
Thank you very much, everyone. For councillors and officers who have not introduced themselves, once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you're speaking, if appropriate. There are 3 public speakers registered for this evening's meeting, all speaking virtually. We have John Baldwin, agenda item 6, Andrew Hill, agenda items 6, 7, 9 and 10, and Richard Cashmore, agenda item 8. I'd just like to take this opportunity to remind all persons wishing to speak at tonight's meeting that all comments should please specifically be in relation to the agenda item and its published report. So we'll now start the agenda items. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair.
And declarations of interest? No. And have we all read the minutes and do we all approve? Any questions or comments on them?
Agreed.
No. I don't have any appointments. And now forward plan. Oren.
Thank you, Chair. So a number of additions since our last meeting in January. So the first item is an urgent item for this evening's meeting, which is John West House Contract Award. 2 new items for the 2nd of April meeting, which is the Council Plan Refresh 25-26 and Progress Update on Deliverables April to October 2024 and the Reform Road Development Land Site. And then 2 further new items for the 30th of April meeting, the Standards and Quality of Education, a review of the academic year 2023-24 and the Integrated Sexual Health Service.
Thank you very much. I have an item I'd like to add to the agenda for the Cabinet Forward Plan for the April meeting. I'm sure you've all heard mention of 2 issues recently, devolution and the reorganisation of local government. They are 2 separate but connected issues, and this is a good opportunity to lay out my thoughts on them. Firstly, the devolution of government powers to regional mayors. You'll not be surprised to hear that I'm not really a great fan of giving power to one person rather than the way a council works, with lots of opinions leading to better decisions. I'm very much in favour of teams with diversity of people in them, and that's why I want to see good, positive working relationships between councillors. A mayor doesn't give you that, so I support devolution, but not to a single person, but rather to local council or groups of local councils working cooperatively. Nevertheless, it's not in my hands to stop a mayoral system being introduced, so we have to engage positively with the process. Given that ministers will force us into regional structures if local areas can't decide, we need to make sure that we're shaping our own identity. That's why I'm engaging with discussions with other local authorities. Berkshire is too small, apparently, to tick the government's box, so I've been talking across Berkshire and Oxfordshire. Some council leaders want Swindon to be a part, not quite sure why. Personally, I don't see Swindon as part of that structure. Local government reorganisation, however, is a separate issue. All the 2-tier authorities have been asked to bring forward proposals for merging their councils. As a unitary council, we have not been asked by the government, However, as a small unitary of under 500,000 residents, it is possible we will be impacted, although we have not yet received a formal letter from the government. Although, as a small unitary, it is certainly a possibility that some Berkshire unitaries have started talks. So I know West Berks recently been reported been talking to South Oxfordshire and the Vale of the White Horse, and Slough have been talking to Hillingdon. The most likely councils that we could be merged with are obviously Slough. With its even bigger financial problems and its massive council tax, merging with Slough will mean council tax increasing by up to 40% in the borough, and a merger with Reading, I've been told, could see increases of up to 45%. Along with both those options, a massive loss of control for our residents of what goes on in the borough. To be honest, I've been really shocked by some of the proposals that have been put forward by the Conservatives. But to be honest, any mergers will mean big increases in council tax, way over 25%, as ours continues to be the lowest in the country outside London. If later it is decided to merge us, then we need to be ready to protect our two towns that do not have the protection of a town or parish council. So I'd want the paper that you produce, Stephen, to also lay out the process for creating these town councils. But I repeat, the government has asked us to look at devolution, but it's not yet asked us to look at local government reorganisation. Having been a Berkshire County councillor when Berks was abolished and the unitaries formed, I know how destructive to good governance local government reorganisation can be. For 2 years, Berkshire County Council went into a form of suspended animation, with nothing being achieved. And already it is having an effect here. The message must be to not be distracted by any of this, but continue to work at fixing the mess we have all inherited. No decisions have been made and discussions are at a very exploratory stage. As and when things become clearer, Cabinet and full Council will be fully involved. So it'd be great to have a paper brought to Cabinet in April, laying out where we are and what we need to do, while not distracting us from the important work we're all doing at the Council.
Okay, so can you add that?
Any other items for the forward plan? No? Excellent. Right, we'll move on to the main part of the agenda, which is the budget. Lynn.
Thank you. The papers before you set out the budget for 25-26 and the recommendations can be seen on page 25. I have a couple of amendments to the recommendations. Recommendation 1J is amended as Appendix P will be part of the main paper at Council. The detail in Recommendation 2 has been superseded as Government has agreed to an additional 103 million of borrowing as a drawdown facility. These proposed spending plans of 132 million to deliver essential local services in the new financial year are an increase of 32 million against the current year's budget and include efficiency savings of 6 million in transforming services. You can see that the budget includes significant growth in services to meet demand and increase capacity in crucial areas, as itemised in Appendix C, including in social care and housing services where the Council continues to face demand and supply pressures. These together make up more than 70% of the Council's expenditure on services. It also includes a 3% pay award. I would hope councillors are aware that the lack of pay awards over the years has left us unable to keep track with others and has led to recruitment challenges in a very competitive market. This budget is proposed within the landscape of a chronically underfunded social care system. LGA analysis shows that the children's and adult social care faces additional cost pressures nationally of 3.4 billion in 25-26 compared to this year. It is worth noting from the start that the Council has significantly lower rates of council tax compared with all Berkshire authorities and other councils in the region. It also receives the lowest level of government funding and has the lowest spend per head of population, compared to other similar authorities. These comparisons can be found at Appendix S. RBWM benchmarks as low cost, reflecting historical decisions to reduce capacity and services. In most areas, services are already reduced to statutory levels, those that we have a legal duty to provide. And in some, they have been cut back so close to the bone that the lack of capacity has impacted on our ability to deliver even that. This budget will mean that we can start to replace services that were historically stripped out under the previous administration. Details can be found at Appendix D. They include maintaining our streets, our trees, and our play areas, and supporting more of the borough's most vulnerable residents by meeting the rising demand and cost for temporary accommodation and social care. While we are proposing to increase spending to help deliver these services residents need, what cannot be ignored is that the damage from years of underfunding is extensive. The council has relatively high level of debt in comparison to the size of the overall budget. In 24-25, the council's net revenue budget is 118.7 million, and the level of debt stands at 230 million. The servicing of which is 14 million a year, around 12% of net revenue. By funding a proportion of borrowing through short-term loans, the council has been exposed to increasing interest rates, which is now being addressed through the Treasury Management Strategy. Our budget addresses issues that were hidden for up to 10 years under the last administration, including historical accounting errors and decisions, unaudited accounts, and savings plans that quite frankly just did not exist. Just as worryingly, the level of capacity being stripped out of the organisation to the point that it could not effectively deliver services with systems that were not all fit for purpose and did not provide the data analysis or reporting to ensure decisions were robust. This was all highlighted by the independent review we commissioned last year with SIPFA in what they termed the discovery phase. We're already taking action to address this. The capital programme has new projects totaling just over 14 million, mostly investment in IT, much needed investment in our systems that has not taken place for years. You'll note at paragraph 6.3 that of that total, only 0.946 million is funded from the general fund, highlighting our grip on spend. The capital strategy can be found at Appendix F. I would like to make you all aware of a risk within Appendix K concerning the dedicated schools grant deficit. There is currently a statutory override in place so that authorities do not have to include the deficit in their financial viability assessment. The override is in place until 2026, but it's unclear whether it will continue. This deficit currently stands at just over 5 million. The government publicly acknowledges the challenges the councils are having delivering the required special educational needs and disability services. I would like to thank the scrutiny panels for their input, and we'll address some comments raised by the corporate overview and scrutiny found at Appendix Q in this report. The contingency has been increased by 50% and is now 5.3 million, while the reserves have been set at 15 million, in total approximately 11.5% of service budgets. The main assumptions can be found at paragraph 5.4 and include overall social care inflation at 10% in 25-26, temporary accommodation at 6%, and a general inflation level of 2% that is applied to the minority of budgets not covered by more specific uplifts. Our budget proposals also address the recommendations following the SIPFA review and reflect our financial improvement and sustainability plan, which outlines the actions and decisions we'll need to take over the short and medium term to get the council and its finances back on track. And these are actions that are at the forefront of all our decisions. Some areas of delivery can be seen at paragraph 4.14. The pace and action we are working to are at odds with what happened after SIPFA's original review in 2020. when they told the council then, that administration, that the council was facing a significant financial challenge and it was more acute than other councils due to its extremely low level of reserves. And what did they do? Nothing. And recommendations SITFA gave them then are now being actioned by us. Despite the significant action we have taken to grip the financial situation we inherited, the borough's unsustainable low levels of both council tax income and government funding compared to other authorities, combined with the high levels of debt, meant we had no choice but to formally ask for significant government support. We applied to government for approval to levy a council tax increase of 20% above their current referendum cap of 4.99% to ensure our revenue matched our costs. The government was very clear that they were only considering a 1-year settlement. So the ask from them was what we needed in 1 year to be sustainable. That's why it looks so high. If they'd given us a 3-year settlement, the council tax increase would have been spread over 3 years. The government has approved an 8.99% increase to help address the unsustainable low council tax levels due to the historic decision to cut council tax year after year over a sustained period from 2010. While this will mean an annual increase of up to £119 for the council element of bills for an average Band D property, the equivalent of £2.30 a week, borough bills will still be the lowest of all other Berkshire authorities, and the expectation is it will still be one of the lowest outside London. And additional funding of £400,000 has been built into the budget to provide support for the borough's most vulnerable residents, protecting them from the additional council tax increase. This council tax agreement with government represents the joint second highest increase allowed in 25-26, with only 6 councils permitted to increase council tax above the referendum limit, the cap, next year. Only half of these councils who requested a council tax increase above cap were given permission, and in all cases, increases were below what each council requested. You can find the Section 25 statement by the Chief Finance Officer at Appendix R. This constitutes the advice to members of the robustness of the budget and the risks within that budget. We can, of course, call a referendum on the 25% rise in council tax. And a recommendation on this report is to discuss this, and we will. However, responses from the draft budget consultation, Appendix N, told us that over half those respondents stated that they did not recognise the need for that level of rise, and 3/4 telling us the impact on them of that level of rise would be significant. And my personal view is, given that and the cost to the council, which could be up to £500,000, and the fact that there has never been a successful referendum, we should not recommend this action to council. It is clear from discussions that the government recognise the current budget predicament faced by this council, particularly the low levels of council tax, which is not sufficient to fund local services. And they have accepted our financial modelling that a council tax rise at cap could not be compensated for by finding yet further savings from the budget. The structural budget deficit facing the council, the gap between our income and what it costs to provide our statutory services, due to years of council tax cuts and increased borrowing, cannot be closed through efficiencies, transformation, or cuts alone. While the 2025-26 council tax increase on its own is not sufficient to eradicate this deficit and balance the budget over the medium term, it's an important first step to returning funding to similar levels to other authorities. The controls we've had in place on spending since October 2023 and the need for any spend over £500 to be approved by the Spending Control Panel of senior officers will continue with a renewed effort on eradicating all non-essential spend. The government also approved our request for 103 million exceptional financial support, EFS, last week, allowing us to set a balanced budget for the next financial year, address historical issues and re-establish reserves at a sustainable level of 15 million and avoid issuing a Section 114 bankruptcy notice. EFS is a drawdown facility that will be paid back over 20 years from when funding is accessed in accordance with the conditions set by government. An asset review is ongoing, and any prudent disposals will reduce the amount to be borrowed. The Treasury Management Strategy can be found at Appendix J. While this means that services can continue, it is also effectively only permission to increase borrowing to fund day-to-day spending. So it adds to the pressure on council budgets with increased borrowing costs in future years. To put it another way, the additional circa 10 million of borrowing costs required for a higher than anticipated capitalisation direction more than wipes out the 3.7 million of additional income generated by the agreement to increase council tax by 4% above cap. And there are conditions. The government will require us to report final amounts identified requiring capitalisation for each year with the agreement of the council's external auditors. The government has also confirmed if we are considering financing capitalisation support through capital receipts, we will have to avoid the disposal of community heritage assets, protecting the public ownership of locally significant sites to ensure residents can continue to benefit from them. Not that this was anything we were considering in the first place. But this is the only mechanism that government has made available to councils to allow them to balance the budgets. It is the only option we have, and we are not the only council to receive such an agreement. 30 councils in total have had similar agreements agreed last week. This follows the 19 councils who received EFS to set their 24-25 budgets, which goes some way to demonstrate the dire state of local government funding. That being the case, we will need to reopen discussions with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG, almost immediately on the level of support needed to set a balanced budget in 26-27 and over the medium term. It is also critical that the government uses the upcoming spending review to provide councils with a significant and sustained increase in overall funding that reflects current and future demands for services. For us, we now need to look ahead. We know how we got here, what went wrong historically, and who is to blame. But the focus should now be the future. All of us working together, delivering the priorities in our council plan and our financial improvement and sustainability plan for our residents. I look forward to Cabinet's comments on the budget and the following discussion regarding the referendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Really well said. Ian, would you like to? Or Stephen?
Yeah. I just wanted to thank you, Stephen Evans, Chief Executive. I will hand over to Ian in a moment, but I wanted to say a few things building on what Lynn, Councillor Jones has said. So the 25-26 budget includes a £32 million increase in funding for services compared to this year, mainly to children's and adult social care and housing, which are under the most pressure. It includes savings and additional income of £6 million and starts to put funding back into budgets for areas which were stripped out in previous years, such as essential maintenance of public assets. There's also additional capacity to frontline and corporate services, such as place services and finance, but we need to recognise that our capacity will still remain significantly below other councils because we're starting from such a low base. It's clear we need significant financial support from government to balance the budget next year, and further support will be needed in future years. Last week's in-principle agreement from government to grant the council's exceptional financial support request in full, combined with permission to increase council tax above the cap level, does provide some certainty for next year that we can meet our statutory duties. However, EFS, also referred to as a capitalisation direction, is effectively increased borrowing to fund day-to-day spending. So it's very far from a perfect solution to the financial challenges that local authorities face. it adds to the pressure on budgets by increasing borrowing, which has to be paid back with interest over 20 years. So we'll need to look carefully at which assets can be sold, where it makes strategic sense to do so to help pay down the council's debt. As Councillor Jones says, 30 councils received similar agreements following 19 councils a year before, with more agreements likely in the future. This isn't a normal situation, although it's becoming more normal. So many local authorities effectively operating on the brink of bankruptcy and only able to plan a year ahead. There's clearly a systemic problem with the way local government is funded. We'll see if the government's forthcoming spending review offers some solutions to the financial pressures facing the sector, but we do need to be realistic given the state of the wider public finances and competing priorities on public spending. The crucial point for us is a capitalisation direction is the only mechanism available to councils in financial difficulty, so it's the only lever we're able to pull. Having said that, the agreement is crucial for RBWM as it allows us to set a budget for next year, and it also avoids us having to issue a Section 114 bankruptcy notice. And I do think that the government wouldn't have agreed to this level of support and the council tax increase announced a couple of weeks ago if they didn't recognise the seriousness of our financial challenges or thought that our plan to tackle them wasn't credible. But this agreement doesn't eradicate the council's ongoing structural budget gap of £30 million, which can't be closed through savings, efficiencies, transformation, or increased income alone, although clearly we need to maximise the savings we can achieve. So that being the case, the council will need to open discussions again with government about the level of support needed to set a balanced budget in 2026-27 and over the medium term. The controls we have in place, including the spending control panel, will need to be retained with a renewed effort by all councillors and officers to eradicate all non-essential spend alongside further strengthening of financial governance. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about whether RBWM should have issued a Section 114 notice before now and the risk of one in the future, and Ian O'Donnell can say a bit more as the council's chief finance officer. But only the CFO has the power to issue a Section 114 notice. And there's a lot of confusion about what a Section 114 notice is. It's essentially a technical mechanism which takes its name from Section 114 of the Local Government Act 1988, which allows the CFO to prevent certain types of non-statutory spending. And given that we've had spending controls in place for the last 2 years, the impact of issuing a Section 114 wouldn't get anywhere near to closing our £30 million budget gap. So it wouldn't solve our financial problems. What it would likely lead to is councillors losing some or all control of the council, with the potential for government-appointed commissioners to be deployed. And those commissioners don't have special powers. In most cases, they're council chief officers from other authorities, and the levers they have to pull are the same levers we're currently pulling. And those councils that have had commissioners in place have relied on the same things we're relying on: council tax increases and capitalisation directions to set their budgets. Many of those councils that have had commissioners in place for the past few years are back again for further government support to set their budgets for next year. So a Section 114 notice and commissioners is not a solution. Local government is operating in a period of significant change, not least in relation to the government's plans for devolution and reorganisation, plans which will impact RBWM. We do need to be part of those discussions, as the leader has said, but we can't let reorganisation distract us from pressing on with delivering our plan. So my clear advice, and I echo what Councillor Jones has said, is that we need to look forward. There's been much talk about what went wrong in RBWM. Lessons need to be learned and changes made, but now's the time to focus on the future and delivering our plan.
Ian?
Good evening. My name's Ian O'Donnell. I'm the Interim Executive Director of Resources. And there are two things that I would like to highlight. The first one is I will say a bit more about Section 114, but I'll also highlight my Section 25 report, which is at Appendix R of the report. But before I do any of that, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank Julian McGowan and his finance team, and all of the officers who have contributed to putting this budget report together. It's a very substantial document. There's a huge amount of work that's gone into it, and I think they can be very proud of what they've achieved. Section 114 of the Local Government Finance Act 1988 vests the Section 151 officer, the Chief Finance Officer, with some powers which can only be exercised in certain circumstances. And those circumstances are when the council is unable to agree a balanced budget, or when it is about to or has entered into unlawful expenditure. And at that point, it is my responsibility to issue a notice to the council, which does two things. First of all, it prevents the council from entering into any new expenditure arrangements without my express permission as CFO. And it also calls a meeting of the council within 21 days to discuss the issue that has arisen and find a resolution to it. Now you can see immediately that that is not a viable alternative to setting a balanced budget. All it does is it calls members' attention to the fact that they need to discharge those responsibilities about setting a balanced budget. And that arrangement of not being able to enter into any new financial commitments remains in place until such time as they have addressed the issue. If they're still unable to do so, then the thing that is very likely to happen, as Stephen said, is that the government will then feel that it needs to intervene. And we've seen that now in a number of councils around the country. And I've worked in some of those councils where there has been an intervention in place. And again, it's not an ideal solution. It creates its own issues. And the best option is for us to solve our own problems. So what I'd like to do now is to talk about my Section 25 report, which is another responsibility that's placed on me, this time by a different piece of legislation. It's the Local Government Act 2003, Section 25. And that requires me to advise members in relation to the budget on the robustness of the estimates and the level of reserves. So in my report at Appendix R, I have covered all of the issues that need to be taken into account when assessing whether the budget is robust and the level of reserves is adequate. So just a few comments about the highlights in there. First of all, in considering whether the budgets are robust, one of the things that we have done is we have taken action to right-size budgets. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the current year, and we've got a report on the agenda which does that, you can see that we are overspending against our base budgets. What we need to do, if we're going to have a chance of managing within a budget next year, is to make sure that our budgets are set at the right level so that we have the appropriate amount allocated to the activities that we're going to be carrying out. And so a lot of work has gone into making sure that our budgets are set at the proper level. We've been through a long process of looking at the need for growth in the budget, and we've also looked very hard at opportunities to find savings. And all of those proposals have been viewed from the point of with the question of whether they are robust or not. My advice in the Section 25 report is that that process has been successful, and I believe they are robust proposals. I'll also highlight the point that we have increased the contingency by 50%. So that gives us more opportunity to manage any issues which unexpectedly arise during the year. And we've also increased reserves by 50%, up from 10 million to 15 million. Again, that allows us to deal with any significant issues that might otherwise disrupt our plans to operate within budget. However, I have made some qualifications in my Section 25 report. I just need to mention this. Obviously, the first one is that the government must agree to the required level of capitalisation. Whilst at this point we have in principle agreement to that, the Minister has said minded to, that still needs to be finalised. The estimates of social care and housing demand and costs may not be as accurate as we would like due to the issues that we have, historical issues resulting from inadequate systems and poor underlying data. We have to also understand that service levels have already been reduced to statutory levels in most areas, and there is no opportunity to make significant service cuts in response to in-year pressures. So that would not be a way of managing the any budget variances. The opening balances have not been audited, and therefore you only have my assurance that those are accurate. And this could mean that there are some historical issues which have yet to emerge. So the Council must continue to improve its financial management and in particular the delivery of savings. And I know that we have put measures in place through the Financial Improvement and Sustainability Plan. We've put measures in place in regard to delivery of savings, which enable us to meet that requirement. Longer term financial planning must improve, and that needs to be based on improved service data. And the spending controls that we have had in place now since late 2023 must continue in place until our financial outlook improves.
Thank you very much, Ian. Catherine, would you like to tell us about the adult services budget?
Thank you. So we've already heard about the challenges local authorities are facing up and down the country due to increasing pressures on statutory demand-led services, including adult services and housing. These pressures aren't unique to RBWM, but they are exacerbated by the financial challenges that we've inherited. Adult services still provides good service at a low cost per head. And when you have a service that is as lean as ours is, with any discretionary spend being linked to prevention, making further cuts is not an option. So any savings have to be made through genuine transformation. Key to that is our new computer system for all social care information, known as Mosaic. Mosaic went live in January and is proving its worth in flushing out issues and helping us to carry out service improvements. This week, our interim adult services financial consultant has started work. So now that Mosaic is up and running, he'll help the management team to put in the tools that the service needs to understand how much we're spending, the impact of decisions we're making, and to give the finance team the level of granularity they need to provide constructive challenge, giving us all increased confidence. Once those tools are in place, that will show up any mismatch in allocation across budget codes, so we can make sure budget is allocated correctly. And from that point onwards, every manager will need to worry about whether their team's expenditure is in the black. Work with Newton continues apace, and work on the first set of state savings will start early in the new financial year. This work will involve helping people to live more independently, but it's important to emphasise that they will still be supported. We're not going to be pulling the rug out from under anyone's feet. We've budgeted £500,000 of savings so far, which have been assessed as being deliverable, but the work doesn't stop there, and we expect to see further savings delivered in 26-27, or even during the coming financial year, which could help the overall financial position. We have two further savings identified. One is to continue our work to reduce our dependence on agency staff, and the other is to continue to hold down our costs for provision of care, whilst recognising the real pressure created by national changes to national insurance and living wage regulations. As you may expect, there's also considerable growth in adults, and a large part of that is right-sizing the budget to match the costs that we now know that we will incur for people currently being supported by the council. Last month, we let go of some undeliverable historic savings, and that needs to be reflected in the budget going forwards. We're also noting an increase in complexity of care across the service. Due to transformation work for young adults transitioning from children's services, we'll now be supporting them from the age of 18 rather than somewhere between the ages of 18 and 25. So there's some additional expenditure needed to support that. And there's impact from the national insurance and living wage increases on other parts of the service, including Optilis, our provider company. We've included money for 4 posts to support hospital, discharge, occupational therapy and social work, all to support our goal of helping people to live more independently for longer. As well as financial benefits of this invest-to-save approach, our goal is to deliver better quality of life for residents receiving our services. Finally, we are increasing our principal social worker capacity to drive practice improvements across the service. In housing, we're looking to build on our successes of this financial year in tackling the temporary accommodation crisis. In December and January, families moved into our project at St Edmunds, and we continue to look for opportunities to deliver new temporary accommodation supported by a refocused property team, our housing association partners and external grants, including the Local Authority Housing Fund. Later on this evening, I will be asking you to approve the awarding of the contract to renovate John West House. With a dedicated project manager on board and the support of the property team and housing, we are going all out to deliver that project in October. Reflecting the high demand for housing services and the increased number of people coming forward for housing, we have growth bids in for temporary accommodation, as well as additional staff members for the housing team. This strengthened team will have an increased focus on homelessness prevention to support our goal of reducing the number of people requiring temporary accommodation in the first place. And to that end, we're working closely with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to get underneath the data and identify opportunities for savings. This year, we will deliver a new temporary accommodation strategy, and we're reviewing the way that we procure temporary accommodation. Briefly on the consultation feedback, residents commented on the unfairness of council tax, and I couldn't agree more. Regressive taxes like council tax are particularly unfair on lower earners. We need a national solution for adult social care that's fairer on taxpayers, as the current system is unsustainable in the long term for any council, even those who currently have good reserves. I'm glad the government are committed to a review, but with a target of 2028, a great deal more local authorities will find themselves struggling in the interim. I noted that some groups were underrepresented in the consultation feedback, and that's something I'll be addressing with the Equalities Officer this year. We've only collected detailed demographic data since last year, but it's already proving useful in showing us where to focus our efforts for next year's budget. Finally, I'd like to thank Corporate Scrutiny for their feedback on the draft budget. And just picking out a couple of comments. One was that the budget must be the starting point for restoring services that had previously been cut excessively, and I could not agree more with that statement. I also agree that increased debt is not desirable, but it is very much necessary for the reasons already explained. Finally, I would urge everyone to look at Appendix S. This compares our spend per head with other boroughs, and it is truly sobering, and it really highlights what we're up against. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I have Amy.
Thank you. I mean, I could say very, very similar things to you, Catherine, because we experience some of the same issues, but I will try to keep it brief so I'm not just repeating. We continue in children's services to be a low spend but high outcomes council when matched against other councils, and our numbers, our figures, our data is very favourable. The number of our children in care, the number of EHCPs that we have, but spend per head, we are 15th lowest out of 150 local authorities. And we continue to face the pressures, the demand pressures, and particularly the issue of sufficiency in placements. The number of foster carers that we can place our children with has gone down. And at the same time, we're having to place more and more children in expensive residential placements. The numbers that we're having to place have changed and shifted just beyond anybody's expectations, from a sort of baseline of maybe 12 up to possibly 16 children being placed in those placements to up to 30, 31 children. So it's been a complete shift in that profile. And the complexity of those cases has also increased. Some of our young people require really high levels of care and support, and we are having to pay for that in a market that is very demanding and can ask for what they want, essentially. We're looking at an average weekly cost of around £6,000 per young person in one of these residential placements, with some costing upwards of £15,000 a week. So you can see very quickly how things are spiralling. So that's the pressure we're facing. And again, we've spoken about how we're not necessarily had our budgets being right sized for that demand. So what are we doing to sort that out? There are a number of savings in the budget, and it is important to say again that we can't keep on cutting. We are right down now towards the statutory level, and so it is about transformation. So we've got our Families Together team working really closely with families to try and avoid children entering care that don't need to be, that can stay with their families, because that's what we want for them. That's the best thing. We're developing our kinship, our family care placements to keep young people within their extended families. We're working really hard to increase the number of in-house foster carers. I think the average cost of placements for in-house foster carers is about £25,000 a year, compared to well over 250,000 for a residential placement. So that's a key thing we're doing, and we're announcing a package of benefits to encourage people to become foster carers, because we want to reward them for the work they're doing, and having also a really good campaign. And then one of the key things that's mentioned in the budget is the children's home that we're bringing online, hopefully this summer. It's all going very well and good to plan. And that will give us 3 beds that will be able to replace 1 very high cost residential placement and 2 medium cost placements, and the savings there will be significant. Lynn mentioned, and it's been said so many times, that the gap can't be closed by efficiencies alone. So we're having to do these really bold transformational projects to help ease the pressures. Another thing I just wanted to mention is about social workers. We've had to rely on agency social workers, and obviously that comes at a great cost. But in the last 18 months, we have seen 35 agency social work staff down to 24, with a really concerted effort to turn employees to permanent employees and reduce turnover as well. So we've got a great package of benefits. More and more social workers are wanting to work in RBWM for AFC, because they know it's a good place to work. Ofsted have confirmed that. We have a good reputation, and they know they'll be well supported. So that is a real highlight and a success, and the work is ongoing there. We want to convert as many agency staff to permanent as we can. I just wanted to finish by talking about the consultation, and just to thank the Youth Council for their response to the consultation. They are extremely diligent, and every year they send us a very challenging and thoughtful response to the budget. And they had concerns this year about the impact of a potential 25% increase in council tax. They also had other concerns that they raised, and which we'll address with them individually. But one of the things that they've sadly they've had to repeat over a number of years was about the safety of young people in the borough and the quality of lighting in the borough. And as we know, maintenance budgets were not in place, and that's something that we haven't been able to address previously. So I'm hopeful now that we will be able to see some progress. So the next time they write to us, there will be it will be to say thank you for making those improvements.
Thank you very much, Amy. Richard.
Yes, I mean, I think the main areas we're really pleased are within environmental services, deals with the bins and the grass cutting. Obviously, residents will have seen Lib Dem leaflets over many years saying, why can't the Conservatives cut the grass and why can't they empty the bins? And the answer to that question was that all the staff that managed those contracts, their posts have been left vacant. So there was nobody managing the contracts. So I think the big takeaway in my portfolio really is the restaffing of those posts. And it's obviously slow, steady progress. It's not a magic wand. But I am told by residents in my ward when I knock on doors that they can see things gradually going in the right direction. And hopefully, I think that restaffing will be complete later in the year. And hopefully we'll keep travelling in the right direction. Not a super light speed, but in the right direction at a steady pace.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's good news. And Mark.
Thank you, Simon. So I'd like to comment on the systems and processes behind the numbers in the budget. This budget proposes significant improvements to those systems and processes, as we've heard, and these are effectively behind the scenes at RBWM. It's very much the next phase in our overall plan to fix the mess. We fixed a number of key things last year, and we're fixing more things this year. Hollowing out of the council due to poor decisions and a lack of transparency during the decade from 2013 to 2023 left many of these systems and processes not fit for purpose. What we found is that there was far too much reliance on manual intervention, for example, spreadsheets prone to errors, and manual processes such as posting invoices in the mail rather than emailing, which continues to this day. The inadequacy has become clearer and clearer as we've got more and more into the details of the operations of each service. As we've already heard, the key systems improvements included in this budget are the new case management systems, Mosaic in adult social care and Liquid Logic in children's social care. And I particularly want to emphasise that these are replacing inadequate systems that are based on spreadsheets and manual work that have really hampered the performance management of the council in recent times. In considering the context for this budget, it's helpful to refer back to the CIPFA report from 2020. It highlights many weaknesses of the council systems and processes then and gives some insight into that administration. To me, it's a history lesson not to be repeated. In that 2020 report, CIPFA made 105 recommendations. Looking through, many were not implemented by previous administrations, even though councillors at the time were told they were. And this is supported by the more recent reviews undertaken by CIPFA last year. Examples include, from 2020, the charging of revenue items to capital, and I quote, due to pressure on revenue budget. This has continued until this administration was able to complete the recent review of balance sheets and correct these errors. Another recommendation states control account reconciliations need to be undertaken regularly to ensure they are up to date, balanced and independently verified. This was not done, but is being done now. And further, the report recommended that the finance team was to be reviewed to ensure it met the needs of the organisation. This still fell a long way short come 2023, and there are many more examples like this. But we are now focused on moving forwards. We have already addressed some of the weaknesses we found, and this budget addresses many more. And residents don't just have to take our word for it. Consistent with our policy of openness and transparency, we're working with the Interim Executive Director of Resources and other officers to set up a detailed CIPFA recommendation tracker to report on the status of each recommendation in previous reports. And this will be updated regularly, probably alongside the QAR. We're also restoring critical officer positions in the corporate centre, as well as elsewhere in the services, as you've heard. As part of this budget cycle, the council's teams have carried out an extensive review of existing staffing structures and posts, and the results of which have included some reorganisation, some role amendments, and in some cases adding capacity. As Councillor Coe mentioned, 3 roles have been added back to waste and recycling services to support behavioural change. And in highways, we're adding an inspector to assist with job sign-off by contractors. And in housing, an additional housing options officer to support with those who present as homeless. We're also training our own workforce. Capacity and resilience is being added with professional trainee posts with 3 graduates in finance and 2 trainees in legal, and also expert roles being added in IT security. So to summarise, I've referred to systems and process issues that would normally be considered basic requirements of any large and complex organisation. Repairing the damage done previously is taking time. We're catching up on a decade of underinvestment and repairing the damage from short-term decisions taken by previous administrations. We are addressing more issues with this year's budget, and we're doing it in an open and transparent manner, delivering a better council while being accountable to our residents.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, I think we have Helen Price.
Thank you. I'm speaking first as the Deputy Chair of Corporate, as the Chair can't be here. And our note to Cabinet was Appendix Q. The question is, why haven't you been able to set more funds aside as a buffer? By that, I mean the contingency and reserves. And we heard that more than past been set aside. And it appeared to me that the buffer's only 8%, although you mentioned a higher percentage. That was of total costs. And I just, with all the risks and uncertainty that have been itemised in Appendix R, in the statement by the CFO, paragraphs 30 and 37, the buffer appears low. So I'd like to know why you feel it couldn't have been higher. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, the contingency has been increased by 50%. And when you take the contingency and the reserves of 15 million together, I believe that's roughly about 11.5% of the service budget, which is where these demand pressures are. So, yeah, it might be 8% overall, but where the demand pressures are, it'd be about 11.5%. In the council's ask to MHCLG, which would be the only way we could increase those amounts at this time, the need had to be evidenced. You know, the evidence would not allow for a greater reserve. We couldn't ask for more just because it would be nice. The need had to be evidenced. We've seen it overspends in social care and housing and ongoing demand and cost pressures. But much work has been done on current data, and those systems are now being implemented. The council's taken advice regarding inflation and demand estimates from organisations and professionals, and these are built into the budget along with the recognition of the overspending that was masked in previous years. So I think there's a number of areas where the budget is more robust than they were, but that includes the reserves and the contingency being increased.
As you're the only member of the only councillor here, I'll let you ask a second question.
So if I can ask questions now as Helen Price.
Yeah.
I had got 2 and I've thought of a third one. I'll keep them sharp and see what happens. So paragraph 14.2 states that members must be confident of mechanisms in place to ensure savings are delivered and expenditure is contained. Could you just describe what those mechanisms are so that I and other members can feel confident? We've heard mention over the past of lots of things, but there are so many different words that get put about.
I'd like to ask Councillor Wilson to answer that because he's in the corporate side, so I think it would be better to.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Helen, for your question. So in terms of delivery of savings, there's obviously a list of savings or efficiencies or more income in the budget pack in Appendix C, and we will be setting up a tracker for these as we go through the year. So it will be we will report back on the delivery of those savings in a similar manner to how we've been reporting this year. I would like to work with officers to make it a bit clearer when those savings are being delivered, but that they will be being tracked. Where they're part of the transformation programme, the transformation board will oversee that, and again that will be incorporated into the QAR. And as I've sort of alluded to, the various finance and systems transformations will assist in the accurate reporting so that the monitoring is more effective than it has been. In terms of how expenditure is contained, I would say expenditure is already very strongly contained. As we've heard, the spending control panel has been in place for some time and will continue to be in place. We have the budget monitoring report, and it's clear that much of that growth in spend is due to external demand pressures, and there is a time lag element of them being reflected in the budget due to the poor systems and processes with data flowing through. But basically, the improvements in the systems and reporting will be the key mechanisms to ensure that the savings are delivered and the expenditure continues to be constrained.
And one of the things I mentioned in the last cabinet meeting, I think, was the speed at which things get reported, so that we're not looking for things for 6 months. And you explained that obviously managers see them earlier than that, but because we as members are meant to see that, is there a way that you can see it speeded up? I think you said last time it's because of Christmas was in the way.
Yes, thank you for the follow-up. So yes, I've been working with the team, with Sophia's team who produced the QAR, and we're looking to effectively take about a month out of that cycle, kind of like holidays and gaps permitting. But where it's currently sort of approaching 3 months, we're targeting like a 2-month turnaround to have a report presented, in a final public forum with good explanations. I completely get the point. We need prompt data to be able to then drive decision making. Although the QAR is more to give assurance rather than to drive decisions. So it's that sort of second phase of going, okay, what's the assurance? So it is on a slightly longer rhythm because there's more to understand in it. But yeah, we're definitely looking to speed it up versus the past year.
And then it's been stated we need more income, which we do. There have been suggestions on many income generating activities which haven't been pursued. And could you just outline why, so other members and residents can hear why some of these ideas just can't be pursued?
Lynn?
Yeah, thank you again, Han. Council do have constraints as to how they can generate income, and they cannot be profit making, which is why we've seen some long arm companies be created. But we have seen some councils lose millions on property deals. Income generation would need an investment up front for these long arm companies, and the capacity at the moment within the council to implement such projects before they would start to make a return. We've got to work hard at doing the basics right within the council, and then maybe looking at the capacity to address that kind of income generation in the future. With RBWM's financial situation and its responsibilities currently to deliver statutory services, it would be quite a high risk to embark on profit-making projects at this time. That's money being taken out of our statutory services to embark on these projects. And you've got to look at the business case as well. A business case that could bring in £1 million then may be worth the investment. Something that might bring in £10,000 in the next 2 or 3 years, obviously it would cost more in the next 2 or 3 years to set that up. So you do look at the business plan to it, like the children's home. That is something that we know will bring in a good return, and we've got a capital asset. So there are areas we can do, but there's areas that would cost too much to set up for the return we could get at the moment, and would put at risk maybe some of our statutory services.
Okay.
One more.
One more.
One
Okay.
more. And it's to do with the council plan, which I always bring with me to every meeting. So the biggest aim is to put the council on a strong financial footing to serve the borough effectively. When I listen to this, I sort of think that's so far away, what you said, because of circumstances just beyond our control. So I know we're going to review the council plan, and it should be an aspiration, of course. But realistically, are we just saying, yes, that's what we want to do, but there are too many external factors that we're just not able to do it?
Len?
I think there's two sections to that. One is that financial sustainability, and I'll be quite honest, without government reviewing their funding, I think most councils are going to struggle with that, but we will do the best we can. The other part is providing those services to residents. And I think this budget does put budgets back in place that does provide the services to residents that we want to, and they require. So it's the delivery of services this budget puts back in place, but the actual financial viability is beyond our control at the moment, I would say, and it's beyond, as you've heard, what a few councils control at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. As always, excellent. Right, I think we have two public speakers. We have John Baldwin and Andrew Hill. I think John asked first, so we'll take John and then Andrew, and we'll try and answer your questions, as long as they're relevant to the agenda item. So, John, you've got how long? 3 minutes, John.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening to everyone. Just calling up my script. It's another year. It's another budget. Another Section 25 report, though this one is more a dodgy MOT certificate with 7 advisories. But it's another verdict of robustness. 24-25's robustness lasted until the first budget monitoring report, by which time the forecast was a £10 million overspend. That has now grown to a £20.5 million overspend, and I will forecast that it will close higher than that. So what are the chances for 25-26? Now, only a few weeks ago, Mr. O'Donnell over there told corporate ONS, and I quote, "I don't think there is a great deal of scope to find lots more efficiencies. I think you are at the point where you're starting to think about, will any further savings impede our ability to be able to deliver our statutory responsibilities?" And yet, miraculously, when his budget must balance, he's found £6 million worth. How robust are they? Sadly, from the descriptions, they look like old promises, previously undelivered and now repackaged. These are not efficiencies, they are balancing items. One new one is initial transformation results. £576,000, wow, to be saved in the AHH budget. Unfortunately, your own description lays bare the flimsiness of this apparently impressive saving. I quote, "During the diagnostic phase of work with Newton, a number of opportunities for sustainable changes will be identified and actioned at a pace."
1 minute remaining.
Will be identified, meaning they haven't yet, and therefore may never not. How robust is that? Despite borrowing 103 million for 25-26, you also intend to use capital receipts to the value of 1.7 million pounds for what we used to call transformation. It's meant to be a spend to save initiative, but you are proposing to squander 1.4 million pounds on 10 line items with no identified savings through to the 31st of March 2030. Worse still is 1.2 million pounds of this will be spent on employing more people. My favourite is £100,000 and £750 to employ one.
Thank you very much, John. Your 3 minutes are up. I'm not sure there was a question in there. So, but thank you ever so much for your statement. It was really appreciated.
I'm not allowed to finish. I'm 10 seconds away.
No, I think you've had your 3 minutes.
I'm not allowed to finish. I'm 10 seconds away from the question.
Lynn, have you got any comments to make? Ian? There wasn't really a question there, so I'm not sure we've got anything to answer. So, Andrew, do you want to step forward? You have 3 minutes, and please try to ask a question.
Thank you. This is not our debt. Mr. O'Donnell says it is financially robust to borrow around 160 million under EFS. He states his position is, quote, in line with advice from SIPFA. But SIPFA don't really agree with this process at all and have taken the unprecedented step of warning government to stop this borrowing madness. In their recent evidence to government, SIPFA say, quote, covering recurring day-to-day revenue expenditure through capitalisation directions is unsustainable and represents poor financial management and, most significantly, poor value for money to the taxpayer. The government must urgently rethink its current position. So SIPFA themselves are urging the government to abandon this type of reckless EFS loan. Why are you even considering shackling us to this unsustainable loans forever tonight? You're proposing to borrow money to create a reserve. That's like me asking Barclays to lend me £1 million and then saying, ooh, look, I'm a millionaire, everything's fine. RBWM say that the golf club may deliver £105 million profits in the 2030s, but every single penny from that has already been spent, wiped out with tonight's £103 million loan. We gave away the entire golf club asset and have absolutely nothing to show for it whatsoever, apart from a thank you tweet from Simon Dudley. I beg you to join SIPFA and put it to government that they've designed an Enron grade accounting system that is punishing ordinary residents. It's a machine that converts real public assets built up over generations into nothing but endless debt. Mr. O'Donnell states at paragraph 4.10 that if you take the 103 million, then, quote, the council will be worse off overall as a consequence. It is unlawful for any councillor to vote to make the council's financial position deliberately worse under Section 3 of the Local Government Act 1999. This says in plain English, a best value authority must make arrangements to secure continuous improvement. Does borrowing that makes us, in your words, worse off sound like continuous improvement to you? The debt will do the exact opposite and is unlawful. And this is precisely why SIPFA talk in the language of poor value and say that government must change direction, and why you too must consider changing direction, councillors. Don't deliberately pilot us into the iceberg. I ask you to go for recommendation 3, your original plan. Yes, that means asking for 25% tax. Yes, that means a referendum. Yes, that means I and the rest of the public will probably reject it. But at least it would be lawful and democratic to put it to the vote. And in that glorious mess, with the eyes of the UK on us, the government will have nowhere to hide from our profound questions about this broken system on which we all agree. This is not our debt, is it, councillors? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and great question. Lynn, would you like to take that?
I'll make a comment, but I'd like to bring Ian in on that as well. Okay. But to be honest, this is our only option, as I said. You know, we have no other option. This is the only mechanism we have to carry on providing statutory services. So, you know, I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to take, risk our statutory services and our services to vulnerable people on proving a point. We all know that this is not the way forward. Government have got a funding review. They've got a 3-year review coming up. This is a stopgap. We know that. The 103 million, we may need to draw down it all, but we might not. So at this moment, I'm not prepared to risk services to vulnerable residents in RBWM to prove a point when there are so many councils in this situation.
Thank you, Lynn. Very well said. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I will comment on the SIPRA advice. So, interestingly, SIPRA has given 2 separate pieces of advice. One piece of advice is aimed at Section 151 officers like me, and it's about the process of setting a budget in a situation where you need exceptional support. What that advice says is that if council is in the position of being able to realistically expect that it will be able to set a balanced budget because it's in dialogue with the government about exceptional support, then it's not in a position to issue a Section 114 notice. So SIPRA's advice there implies that in accepting exceptional support, in its opinion, you will then be able to set a legal budget. However, it has indeed also published its views about the regime in which councils are being asked to borrow in order to balance their budgets, and it has quite rightly made the point that that is a completely unsustainable way for councils to continue into the future. The government has so far said that they are having a spending review at which they will consider how they will address these issues. They put in place a number of measures that are aimed at trying to improve the situation for local authorities, such as the bill that's come forward in relation to children's services, a proposed review of adult social care funding, and a proposed review of the council funding mechanism. But all of those things quite a long way in the future. In the short term, it seems that it's very likely that more and more councils will require exceptional support in order to balance their budgets. And I'm afraid at the moment that is the only game in town for those councils.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your question, Andrew. I think the message is we have no alternative, and much as we don't want to be in this position, that's the position we've been put in by the legacy of the Conservatives and by the decisions of the new Labour government. So, but thank you for your question. Okay, referendum. I think we need to discuss about the referendum. Lynn, have you got any comments to start off with?
Obviously, I did mention it. I did mention it in my budget presentation. This is my personal view, and I just cannot see why we would possibly have costs around coming up to £500,000 that we then can't spend on services to go out to referendum when there's never been a successful referendum. In fact, only one referendum has ever been held. I am sure that councils would use this mechanism across the country rather than going into EFS if there was any chance of residents agreeing to such a rise. and the consultation made it very clear that residents would not be supportive of such a rise. That's my personal.
Thank you very much then, Adam.
Thank you, Simon. I guess I maybe take a slightly different route to getting to the same conclusion as Lynn has. So, ultimately, we've been offered a 4% above cap increase. So a referendum would be asking for an additional 16%. Probably in cash terms, I think that would be approximately £15 million more that we would be able to bring in from council tax receipts rather than having to borrow through a capitalisation direction. That being the case, obviously, 15 million costs will obviously, for having to borrow it will and service that debt will cost in the region of about 1.5 million per annum. So I don't know, in my kind of mind, I look at, is there a business case there for spending between 300,000 and 500,000? The potential of saving, also the potential, of saving 1.5 million per annum in debt service. I mean, obviously, the key missing variable there is the likelihood of succeeding in a referendum, and I think, both Mr. Hill, who suggested that we should go for this, and Lynn, who has obviously strong reservations as well, have both said we almost certainly lose it. I think looking at the consultation responses, that is probably a fair assessment. Looking at Bedfordshire PPC, they're the only that Police and Crime Commission was the only authority that ever tried a referendum for the whole of Bedfordshire, so it actually cost about 600,000, and it was only looking for £24 per annum on a band D, and lost about 31%. So, I think we've got to realise, we did genuinely think that we needed to show what a truly sustainable budget was, and the 25% above cap genuinely was what we believed we needed. It wasn't just a negotiating position; it is what we went to government with. But just as we know what our sustainable budget is, I know that there'll be households, around the borough who also look at their household budgets and think what is sustainable for them. And it's not. I don't want to. Certainly, would never want to sort of blame residents for wanting to be prudent with their money as well. So ultimately, I don't think they probably don't produce hundreds of pages of budget reports in order to make their household budgets, but they've still got the same worries. And that, on that point, the reason I think it's not a good idea, really, is because not only that we're likely to lose, but also the mechanism how it would actually transpire. We would actually be setting a budget. We'd actually set a budget with the expectation that we'd win, and therefore we would actually start billing residents at the higher rate until such time as the referendum result was in, and in all likelihood, as we've said, there's a no vote. You'd end up then needing to refund or offset things. So it would cause a lot of turbulence for people. It would cause a lot of turbulence for the sort of revenues and benefits team to try and handle all that as well. And I think it would be a rather chaotic way of doing it. I mean, I think we do need to keep these things in mind year after year, and we are going to need to keep looking at how we fund ourselves into the future. But ultimately, I have probably I've gone probably on the scenic route, but come to probably the same conclusion that Lynn has come to, that really it's just not it's not in our best interest at this time to push for a referendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other thoughts? Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to focus, I guess, on a couple of points. Firstly, as Catherine said, council tax is regressive, so I think anything we can do to try and buffer residents would be a good thing. Obviously, the original model was, as previously stated, what is our 1 year solution, and the 1 year solution was the original council tax increase. I think where we are now, with the government giving us this loan option, it sort of kicks the can down the road. From the residents' point of view, the council tax bill is what matters. The loan is almost kind of like a technical thing that's a bit unseen. It's in the background, it's with the accountants. But I think the strongest thing for me is the point from the consultation where 74% of residents, so that's pretty much 3 in 4, would experience a significant impact from the increase. And I think if there is an option where we can mitigate that, then I think we should take it. So I think this is sort of okay. We'll take the fact that we've been told to kick the can down the road, and go with that and make the best of that option.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Any other? No. Lynn, do you want to put your recommendations again, including the referendum one?
So I'm proposing that budget recommendations A to J, detailed within paragraph 1, page 25, are approved with the amendment regarding recommendation J, that the report appendix P will now appear in the base report. Recommendation 2 has been superseded, but obviously we wait for the final letter confirmation. And my proposal regarding recommendation 3 is that we do not recommend to full council that we should conduct a referendum for the reasons set out earlier.
Okay, fantastic. I think we'll take them on block, but I think it would be good if we do a name vote on that. Adam.
Sorry, one very small thing to add, which I forgot, as just a technical point. It was brought to my attention there's a correction that's required, a fairly minor one, in the fees and charges, which are in Appendix E on page 84. There is fees relating to strategic access management monitoring for property, it's to do with properties within 5 kilometres of the Thames Basin East Special Protection Area. I won't read out the corrections now, but I think it would be helpful maybe on the resolution relating to that to give authority to the interim director of resources to make that minor amendment before it comes to full council.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So the proposal would be that recommendation 1C, that we give direction that the officers amend the fees and charges to take into account the new information received on those charges.
Fantastic. So we've got a proposal from Lynn. I'm seconding it. So should we take a name vote? Can you do that, Owen?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll list your names in alphabetical order. If you could please tell me if you're for, against, or abstaining. Councillor Beaumonge.
For.
Councillor Coe. For. Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Del Campo.
For.
Councillor Douglas.
For.
Councillor Hill.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Teasey.
For.
Councillor Werner.
For.
Councillor Wilson. For. That's unanimous, Chair.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we'll take a short 5-minute comfort break and then return to the agenda. Thank you very much.
You're gonna have to say it again.
Oh, we're in. Okay. Okay, welcome back everybody for the next exciting instalment. We have month 9 budget monitoring, and we're over to Lynn again.
Thank you. I'll keep this brief. This is the month 9 budget monitoring. The main headline is that adult social care is seeing an overspend increase of 2.5 million. Paragraphs 4.1 and 4.4, the reasons are detailed. There are 1.6 million of costs associated with an adult social care case going back to 2017. That, following a court judgment, will see these costs be the responsibility of RBWM. This is the maximum cost that can fall to RBWM, and there is the opportunity of recouping some of that cost due to shared funding. As stated in the Section 25 report, for the budget, RBWM's policy for many years is not to set provision aside for individual risk, but to include them on the risk register and take a percentage view. That may need to be reviewed at some point. There is also 407,000 due to the expected winter pressure grant funding not materialising. That will be to all councils, and 387,000 due to increased care packages. In place, there is a continuing pressure on planning fees, and a singular case in children's has increased costs by 183,000. Appendix B does set out the further risks we're aware of, totaling just over 4 million. The savings tracker is Appendix C, and the transformation project tracker can be found at Appendix D.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Oh, thank you very much, Lynn. Anyone like to comment? Amy?
Thank you. I just very quickly wanted to pick up on what Lynn said about the £183,000 variance from month 8 in children's services, and the fact that that is just one child's placement. And that sort of figure really shows you the impact of these high cost placements, residential care, and it just reiterates the need to recruit more in-house foster carers and also to get our children's home online.
Thank you very much, Amy. Just to take the opportunity, what do you get as a foster carer?
So if you choose to become an in-house foster carer with Achieving for Children, RBWM, you can get your council tax reimbursed for any full month that you have a child placed with you. You can get a full package of training, support. You can get other benefits such as leisure benefits and other nice things, and a really good payment package as well. You get an allowance, competitive allowance, and you get the full support of our excellent children's services behind you. So, well worth inquiring.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Amy. Catherine.
Yeah, just to add to that, the new allocations policy that we're going to be looking at later also offers assistance to people who are approved to foster but need a larger property in which to foster. So if anyone's considering fostering but and they're in social housing but they feel like they haven't got the space, the new allocations policy will help them too.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? No? Mark.
Thanks, Simon. Just to quickly, I guess, point out on the savings tracker that we're forecasting an 86% delivery of savings, or 7.9 million against the total target of 9.2, which obviously it would be nice to deliver every single saving, but I think 86% is still a very high delivery percentage, given the tightness of the original budget. So just wanted to basically thank everybody in the council who's been involved in delivering those savings. 86%, I think, is a strong result.
That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, can we approve that paper? Oh, no, we've got Andrew here, actually, haven't we? Andrew, you've got, as you know, 3 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Councillor. I won't take 3 minutes. Firstly, let me just thank Mr. O'Donnell for his very considered response to the sit for point. Appreciate that. On this paper, there's a figure 3 to do with the use of car parks. And it shows that Vickers Way is used less than Windsor Library car park. Now, I know Councillor Hill has moved heaven and earth to promote this, but there's only so much he can presumably do. So how much can we quantify the losses here? Do you know roughly how much this car park has net drain on our resources? And if it is a net drain, have you looked at the possibility of selling it or leasing it in some way to somebody else? Thank you.
Jeff, would you like to give your opinion on the whole process of the building of Vickers Way and the financial effects that's had on the council?
How long have you got? Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for your question. I stand to be corrected by the finance team, but I think Vickers Way costs us around £70,000 a month in interest charges and lighting and maintenance. At the moment, we're around about 20% full. When I took it over, we were at 5. So I've managed to get it up a bit, but for a 500 space car park, that's only 100 cars a day, or very approximately. So it's nowhere near washing its face. It's covering the cost of electricity and a bit more. So there's a real drain on the borough's resources. Obviously, my campaign was against it all those years ago. The previous Conservative leader, named Andrew Johnson, for building it. He had an opportunity to back out. We begged him to back out. He didn't back out and spent the money on it. So it is down to the fault of the previous Conservative administration. I sat in front of him and asked him not to build it. Leasing it, selling it, I don't know. We haven't really tried that much. There are rumours circulating around it being used for Heathrow Airport or something. Which would be nice if they would fill it up for us. I'd really appreciate that, because then it would start to wash its face. But as we sit here at the moment, it is a drain on the Royal Borough's resources, and an awful mistake by literally the previous Conservative administration, who could have done something sensible with the site, like sell it for another block of housing or social housing on the corner there. Would have worked really, really well. But no, they went and built a car park against the Area Action Plan, on the wrong side of the Staffington Way. So everything was wrong about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your considered answer, Jeff. And thank you so much for Andrew for such a question. More questions like that, fantastic. Okay, so are we happy to approve that paper? Approved, excellent. Right, Achieving for Children Reserved Ownership Decision. Amy, we have a question from Richard Cashmore, but do you want to introduce?
Yes, certainly. I'll keep this relatively brief. RBWM since 2017 have been joint owners of Achieving for Children, which is a community interest company, not for profit. We own 20% of it, and they run our children's services, which includes looking after children in care and education and that whole area. So we have this report to approve the company's budget, including the medium-term financial strategy and their arrangements for cash flow through the Treasury plan. And we are joint owners with Richmond and Kingston councils. So this report covers some information about their financial details as well and their budgets. But I just would like to say that this is a summary, because this is about the ownership of all three. It doesn't have the granular budget information that our individual councils' budget papers have. So for that, you need to look at what we've just spent a long time discussing. So the medium-term financial strategy focuses on financial sustainability of AFC in very challenging times that all councils are facing, with social care increasing pressure, and all the wider national issues going on at the moment. And the Treasury plan just talks about the borrowing, how AFC can borrow without permission of the three councils, and investments and that sort of thing. So Some of it's fairly technical, and I'm very pleased that we've got Rachel Howard, who's the Interim Chief Operating Finance Officer for ASC, here tonight in case there's anything particularly technical about finances that people would like to ask. But other than that, that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you very much. Now, Richard Cashmore, I think you're on the call. Yes, I can see you. You've got 3 minutes to ask a question and make a statement. Thank you.
Thank you. 5 questions I have are regarding the AFC budget and Appendix B and have been submitted in advance, so please allow me to go through them. So question 1 surrounds context. In a commercial operation, a cost budget would be presented alongside a revenue budget and resultant profit. This enables the stakeholders to understand the value being created as well as the costs, and if the 2 elements are balanced. However, given this is a public sector organisation, the revenue context is inappropriate. However, it's my belief that the cost should be stated alongside the key delivery metrics. For example, capacity and utilisation of the services, in effect showing the value that the cost is serving. Without this context, there's no visibility of tangible delivery or support or means to demonstrate an organisation it's meeting its delivery obligations, i.e. if I pay X, I get Y. Would the Cabinet agree that without the context, the budget cannot be effectively understood or challenged? Question 2, absolute value and year-on-year comparisons. There's a limited detail in the budget on absolute spend levels, by cost nature and how they compare year-on-year. There's a general fund budget pie chart, which depending on the definition of the cost areas, suggests as much as 11.9%, equating to approximately 18 million as overhead. This seems a very high level of overhead cost. Would the Cabinet agree that a breakdown of absolute spending with a comparison year-on-year, allocated by borough, is necessary to understand the budget in its entirety and provide the necessary foundations to develop an understanding and appropriate challenge where necessary? Question 3 is legal services cost increases. The controllable growth component of the budget includes an increase of £287,000 for legal services. What is the nature of these legal costs? What is the absolute level of legal spend in the AFC budget, and why is it necessary for these costs to increase? Assuming the legal costs are in part incurred in defending positions in SEND tribunals, would the Cabinet agree it is a better use of public funding to invest in improved provision of SEND services rather than paying for legal services? Question 4 on inflation. The figures in Table 2 indicate the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead is incurring an inflationary increase in the budget of 6.1%, significantly in excess of Richmond at 1.9% and Kingston at 2.1%. Why is the Royal Borough inflation exposure so much higher than the other boroughs? And the last question on social care placement costs. Social care placement growth accounts for a significant amount of demand-led budget increase, controllable growth increase and savings. Can you please help us understand the rationale for this and what the overall business case is for the spend and savings and the context of delivery and capacity in this area? Thank you for your time, and I welcome the clarification and response.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time. Well done. Really good questions. Amy.
Thank you. I'd just like to say it's fantastic that you have come and asked such detailed questions, and you've actually put a number of opposition councillors to shame who haven't bothered to turn up this evening. So thank you. A few of them are quite technical, and I wonder whether I've got a full written answer here on every question, and I wonder whether it might be easier just to send you those and have those published in the minutes, and maybe pick out a couple of them that I can answer reasonably quickly in terms of telling you the information.
Yes, please, Noddy.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
lovely.
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
No worries. So let me go to. So one of them is question 3 about the legal. Hang on. How many would you like to answer, Simon? How long have we got?
So we're going to do 2.
Do 2. Okay. Going to pick out. So I think with question 2, it was about comparisons and detail in the budget, and I think I mentioned before that actually detailed breakdown of each borough's children's services budgets are in their own budget papers for each council, and so the information would be there, and this is really a summary of the position. Legal services cost increases, the nature of that, you mentioned whether some of it was for SEND tribunals. Actually, the spend, I can give you the exact figures for spend on legal services, but actually majority of it is relating to proceedings, care proceedings for children in care. So there's only a small percentage of legal costs associated with SEND tribunals. It works out to be about 92% on care proceedings and 8% on SEND tribunals. The inflation one's probably a bit complex to get in right now. And the social care placement costs, there is a significant amount of demand-led budget increase, I think, as we've mentioned in the budget section. We've had a change in a reprofiling of the placement types, and the external residential placements, children's home type placements, are so much more expensive than our in-house foster carer, and the demand for those type of placements has really risen at an unprecedented amount, and it's pushed up our overall costs. There is a national shortage of foster carers, and so, like everyone, we're having no choice but placing children in some of those provisions, even if they don't need to be there. The average weekly cost of those is around £6,000. And so the growth, you mentioned about the growth requested for 25-26 is to meet the full year costs for the current cohort of children. So it's only asking for what we need to deliver what we're already doing. That's what we need to fulfil our obligations. I think I'll leave it there if that's okay, just because there's a lot more, but I will email this to you straight away.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for coming to the Cabinet. They're really excellent questions and probing. I've got Helen Price.
Thank you. I looked at the annual statement for AFC and noted that the top leadership team costs 1.2 million. And I just wondered, is that something that we've looked at and said, is this good value for money? Bearing in mind we're trying to save every single penny that we can. So that's my question. Thank you.
Amy?
I think that obviously as an owner, so we are joint owners, and so we, Simon and I, sit on the ownership board of Achievement for Children, along with representatives from the other councils, and we obviously have oversight of AFC. I think the fact that we are achieving high outcomes for our children, and we have good management overall of AFC, shows that it's working effectively, and I think that we need to pay for good people to do that job. I don't know if Rachel wants to come in a bit more.
Yeah, I can do. Thank you, Chair. So I'm Rachel Howard, Interim Chief Operating and Finance Officer at Achievement for Children. I think, like any part of the council, we're constantly looking at our structures and is it fit for purpose, is it the right structure going forward, and trying to ensure we've got value for money. As Councillor Teague says, we do need to pay salaries in line to recruit quality staff into the organisation. In a tight market, we're competing largely with other local authorities for staff, so we do need to pay appropriately and have the right structures in place. We are a large organisation. Across the company as a whole, there's around 1,400 staff, so you need to have appropriate leadership structures in place to manage an organisation of that size. But obviously it is something we'll always keep under reviews to make sure it's fit for purpose.
Thank you very much. Okay, if there are no more questions, can we agree that paper? Yep, fantastic. Review of local development scheme. We've got Adam.
Thank you, Simon. Back in December, the central government published significant changes to national planning policy, together with a new method for calculating housing need numbers for each local authority. Both of these have significant implications for the Royal Borough. Following that, government wrote to every local planning authority with instructions to update a document known as the Local Development Scheme, LDS, and submit these updates by the 6th of March 2025, so got about a week. The LDS contains a timetable for the preparation of future planning documents, such as local plans. Essentially, you can think of it as a plan to make plans in the future. The reason that the government is so keen to see the councils are updating their LDSs is because they want to see that individual councils have a timetable to produce new up-to-date local plans prepared in accordance with their new national policies. Indeed, the current BLP will become technically out of date in February 2027, 5 years after adoption. Having an out-of-date plan does have implications in terms of the Council's ability to resist speculative development proposals. I'm proposing the report's recommendation that we approve the Local Development Scheme 2025 to 2028 in Appendix B, so that it can be published on the Council's website and sent to MHCLG by the 6th of March 2025. The timetable in the proposed LDS has been prepared under the assumption that we will need to follow a new plan-making system introduced under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023. The scope of local plans will be limited to locally specific matters, and a streamlined 30-month plan-making process will be introduced. It is the assessment of the planning policy team that the earliest this work can start formally is the beginning of 2026. With the earliest possible adoption of a new local plan being autumn 2028. As mentioned earlier, the government has also amended the methodology for calculating local housing need. Based on this revised formula, the RBWM need figure has increased from 866 dwellings per annum under the previous standard method to 1,449, an increase of 67%. It is more than double the number of homes that are planned for within the local borough plan. The government has made clear that the new MPPF, that local planning authorities are expected to plan to meet their housing needs in full, although there may be circumstances and constraints that could potentially justify a lower housing requirement figure in a new plan. I should point out that this administration did submit a strong consultation response regarding the new housing need methodology when the Labour government first proposed this in the late summer of last year. But our serious concerns were unfortunately not listened to. Essentially, there is a heavy weighting in the new method relating to how expensive housing is in an area compared with average earnings. We know this is an acute issue in RBWM, and our average ratio of house prices to earnings over the previous 5 years is over 14. The result is that our housing need number therefore balloons in this methodology. Central government's rationale for this is that this will lead to increasing supply, which will lead to falling house prices. But as we argued in our submission, this really is a blunt instrument, and there's little evidence that this will work in practice. Essentially, the planning system can never force developers to build. This report also provides us with an opportunity to discuss the Community Infrastructure Levy, or CIL, and look at the timetable for reviewing the CIL charging schedule. I'm really grateful for Place ONS for looking at this topic in detail and making a number of recommendations to Cabinet, which can be viewed in the attached minutes. They recommend that we start work now with a view to amending the CIL charging schedule. I agree with the principle that the CIL schedule needs to be reviewed. However, the acceleration of the timetable for a new local plan gives us an opportunity to combine these two work streams and, in fact, doing a joint examination of both the emerging local plan and CIL together is considered best practice in national guidance. Also, doing both together will give us more policy levers when it comes to creating the right balance of charges in different parts of the borough. And I therefore propose that Cabinet resolve to conduct a review of the CIL concurrent with the new local plan generation. A further recommendation from ONS relates to conducting local engagement on how CIL funding is spent in unparished areas through the Maidenhead Town Forum and Windsor Forum. Again, I agree with the concept here. During the plan making process, officers will need to produce a new infrastructure delivery plan. I'd therefore like to propose that during the creation of this IDP, Cabinet requests that Maidenhead Town Forum and Windsor Forum are consulted on the infrastructure improvements planned in their respective unparished areas and provide us as a Cabinet with their recommendations. And I'd like to commend this paper to the Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, obviously you responded along the local circumstances that could justify lower housing. Given Windsor Great Park and the floodplain, it's apparent that our development area is quite small once those two areas are taken out. Is there anything else we can do to go back to government to try and explain this outside consultation and to try and make them understand the situation that this borough is in?
It's a good question, and I mean the simple answer is yes. We will continue to push that case, even though obviously the new NPPF is out. There'll be various points throughout the process in this new plan making process to argue those points. And ultimately, yes, the housing requirement number that ends up in the plan may well be lower than that housing need. Certainly, what won't help if we don't put a plan together at all. That housing need number, when we get to the point where BLP becomes out of date, will definitely be the number that everything is based on. And these issues about 5-year housing land supplies and tilted balance, things that the planning committees list here in applications each month will be even harder to overcome. Well, I think we do have a unique case, and in fact, some of the constraints you just described, like having Windsor Great Park, are partly why house prices are so high in the borough. I mean, ultimately, and also people like to live near rivers, and rivers flood, so we've got lots of floodplains. So, yeah, it's we've got a paradox here, and I am disappointed, very disappointed in the way that the final methodology was weighted. It has. It's essentially, if you look over 15 years of that housing number, you're talking about over 22,000 new homes. That's a huge number in such a short period of time. It's not going to have this kind of supply and demand effect that sort of simplistic microeconomics would suggest would happen, because ultimately, where the developers aren't going to be, they're still going to have to buy the land. Why would they be? Why would they be willing to pay those high land prices and ultimately build out that rapid rate? I just don't see it working. But we will continue to push that case and argue why we are a unique borough. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we're going to be banging on the door of Downing Street saying no.
We will try. I don't think I'll get past the gate. We can always try.
I've got Helen.
You mentioned just then about the unparished areas and considering the Windsor Forum, the Windsor Town Forum. With the timing of this and the timing of looking at creating the town councils, can the two actually go together, be dovetailed together? Because if you've got the town councils, you haven't got the problem of unparished areas.
I would say that I think that would be good to look at the two together. I think the suggestion which came out of ONS, which I think is a good one, I guess you could consider that a kind of interim solution, because at the moment the unparished areas don't have a council that we can go to and consult on what they want the community element of their seal to be spent on. So you're right. I think we need to look at that in the look at that large the picture at large. But ultimately I want to something that we can put in place now, because before we know it, there will be a new infrastructure delivery plan being put forward, and I think the best way to manage this infrastructure requirement strategically is to get that buy-in and involvement from some bodies which represent those unparished areas at this point in time. But as those councils, as hopefully town councils appear in the future, we of course would want to work closely with them on that too.
Okay.
I've got a different question.
Okay.
So I remember when the BLP was voted through, which was I think 2022.
That's right.
And council were told, look, it's not perfect, SEPS is not perfect, we've got to have something in place. But don't worry, as soon as this is passed, work's going to start on producing the new one. But reading all of this, None of that happened, and it doesn't look like there was a budget set aside for it either. So is that the case? And then secondly, do we have to pay for the creation of the new BLP? It just has to come out of our budget. There aren't any grants.
Yeah, taking the first point, yes, you're absolutely right. I do remember those assurances provided at the time that the borough local plan was adopted in 2022. But no, the planning policy team have been involved in mostly in working on the supplementary planning documents and there were a great number of them listed in the BLP which didn't actually exist. So they've had to have been working, double hard on that through this period. I think when we took over as an administration, I think only one had been passed. That was the Southwest Maidenhead one. I think we can see where the priorities were there. But ultimately, yeah, we've pushed through and adopted, I think, 3 or 4 more SDP, supplementary planning documents. But the simple answer is no, that they haven't been working. To take your second point, there is, as part of the budget that has been recommended this evening, there is a growth bid line specifically for this. So the expectation is, yes, we do need to fund this out of our own resources. However, there may be opportunities for funding of various work streams to come from grants in the future, and we will work very hard on those. There's currently a grant, a joint bid relating to some early Greenbelt review work, which has been done, and we're awaiting for confirmation of whether or not that's been successful. But where money and grants are made available, we will certainly be putting in the bids for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm really delighted that that SIL is going to be reviewed. That you found a way of doing this creatively, because that's a manifesto commitment we made. It's just great to see that being put into practice. It's also, Adam, you've explained that to me that the best way of ensuring that my ward in Central Maidenhead doesn't end up keeping a 0% SIL rate going forward is to tie in the review with the policy review that comes with the new BLP. So, that's never sat right with me, that 0% SIL in Central Maidenhead. So I'm glad that we're maximising the chances of getting that revised up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If everyone's asking up comments, who have we got? We have Andrew Hill. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Werner. Excellent debate. The paper says that without an up-to-date development plan, we'll be subject to the tilted balance and speculative development. But we currently have an up-to-date plan and we're still subject to tilted balance and speculative development. Whatever we do, we get tilted balance and speculative development. I think you can see where I'm going with this. So we are bankrupt. And you say in this report that it will cost £2 million to prepare a new local plan, which in practice always has one outcome: tilted balance and speculative development. This, in RBWM's own words, defeats plan-led development. So the only logical and rational position to take, Councillor Bannish, as I think you are, is to write to the government and say that under Section 3 of the Local Government Act 1999, it does not represent best value to the people of the borough to engage in a £2 million process with only one possible outcome, one that always harms residents. After all, you said a 300k referendum was money we should spend on services. I'll praise Mr. Motchwell for once. You can practically taste Mr. Motchwell's own despair in this report. He knows the game is rigged. He knows we can't guarantee to build 67% more houses because the test for housing delivery is based on what developers find profitable to build in a given market condition. But the tilted balance punishes councils and residents for failing to achieve developers' own targets that only they control. Rigged game doesn't even come close to what that is. This report notes a number of unfinished SPDs. So what's the point in spending £2 million to come up with a new plan when we haven't even finished the old plan yet? Why hasn't the town centre SPD ever been written? Officers literally relied on the withdrawn Maidenhead Town Centre Area Action Plan last month at the Shanley's post office application. Why hasn't the parking standards been updated as required by the BLP under main modifications? And when you did produce a tall buildings SPD, your own officers described it in the planning meetings as being, quote, negligible weight. So according to your planning team, Councillor Mann, you can build tall buildings anywhere, and we wasted time and money producing SPDs. Well, we don't have that luxury anymore. We're bankrupt. There are people who need food, heating and education more than empty documents that will just be ignored in planning meetings. Please don't waste 2 million on documents which your officers say have negligible weight. The only morally right position, in my view, is to formally challenge government that they are harming the residents of the borough with impossible targets and ignoring ordinary people's voices at every turn. You and I both told the inspector and government that the stepped housing trajectory would fail in the BLP. Officers denied it, but we were proved right, weren't we? I hope you'll be bold again, Councillor Bermange, and tell government, if necessary through the courts, that the Emperor does not need and cannot afford £2 million worth of invisible clothes. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Adam.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. It's very keen observations on many points, I would say. You're quite right. We are under tilted balance at the moment because the new NPPF, which was adopted by the Labour government in December, changed the rules again regarding that. So even if your plan is within 5 years of adoption, you still have to prove the 5-year housing land supply. So yeah, on that basis, we are in tilted balance. To be honest, we're likely to be in tilted balance between now and October 2028 at the earliest, which is when under this proposed scheme we would be aiming to bring a new development plan forward. And yeah, ultimately, what happens after that? It's difficult, and ultimately, if we're still working under the same NPPF, we could have a new, we could work on a new plan, which is, I do think, I still feel the plan-led system is the right one, but you're right, it is undermined by the tilted balance and these stringent rules. And a new plan would not be immune to that either. Maybe it might be immune, for at least a year, but who knows what happens when the promoters of those various allocation sites, whether they actually come forward when we hope they come forward. We don't control that. No council controls that. Yet it's the councils and local planning authorities who are punished through the national policy, through this tilted balance. Ultimately we try to encourage development in a strategic way, but we can't force development, as I said earlier. So yeah, I do share a lot of the frustrations. But at the same time, I feel we need to. I guess we need to go along with the process with central government for now, but make our case as strongly as possible of why we feel this isn't going to work for this Royal Borough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. So if everybody's got any more comments, can we agree that paper?
Agree.
Excellent. Right. So where are we now? Housing allocations policy. Catherine.
Thank you. So the allocations policy has been on quite a long journey. It's been around the houses a few times. It's been to cabinet twice since we've been in administration. But we're now at a point where it's been out to consultation. We have revised the strategy based on the feedback from respondents, and we very much like to approve this policy tonight, so that it can be in operation for the new financial year and hopefully achieve some savings. So the key points to note are, first of all, we have a new top band which sits above the current band A. You could look at it as an A star if you like. And it has really strict criteria, because right now we have too many people in band A. I think the figure last time I checked was 227 households, thinking that they will be housed imminently. And that's not true. They face a very, very long wait indeed. So we've introduced this new band, which is an emergency band. And I think based on analysis, we would expect to have around 10 to 15 families in there in the first instance. What that means, having this new top band is that people can expect to move down a band. It will feel like they're moving down a band, but the important thing is that they're not necessarily moving down the list. So they're still the same place on the list. It's just that they have a better expectation of how long they're going to be on the housing list, because the band better reflects where they are on the list. So that's the first thing. We're introducing a special banding for care leavers, which underscores our commitment to young people in care and people who are care experienced. Care leavers are already housed quickly, usually within 3 months, because that's something that we're really committed to. We're also giving consideration to armed forces members and veterans and survivors of domestic abuse, in line with government guidance. And also, as I mentioned earlier, people approved as foster carers who require a larger property to carry out that role. Really important, people who sort out their own temporary accommodation can now stay on the waiting list. And this includes people who might otherwise have been the subject of a parental eviction, or what I call a friendly eviction. They can now stay where they are, but be on the housing list. The aim of this is to ease pressure on our temporary accommodation costs, but it also allows people to stay rooted in their own communities, close to loved ones, close to support networks, close to schools, where their children are currently enrolled. The current system incentivises people to move into temporary accommodation in order to get onto the social housing ladder, and that just isn't sensible or sustainable. On the feedback from the consultation, there was broad agreement for the proposals, with one exception, which was the income level, where we didn't get a clear steer from respondents. It was all fairly evenly spread. And we feel that this area, because of that, is worthy of further monitoring and investigation. For example, some authorities set different income levels for different property sizes, and that's something that we might want to look at. But we do need to approve this strategy. We do need it to be in operation for all the reasons I've said. So what we're proposing to do is to keep the current savings and income levels as they are, but without enforcing the latter in the short term. And we'll monitor the impact this has on the housing list, and then come back to Cabinet with an update as soon as possible, but no later than May 2026. That's all I want to say. I commend the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for your very full. It sounds like a really good move. Richard.
Yeah, I really welcome so much in this paper, and particularly the thing about being able to keep your place on the waiting list whilst housing yourself. That's going to reduce emergency accommodation costs to us, and it's probably better for the persons concerned, both in terms of better housing in the immediate term and also being on the waiting list. It's a really difficult problem because we're just shuffling the cards, trying to fairly ration out shortage supply of social housing, and the real issue here is just need a lot more social housing bill, which is obviously not completely in our gift.
All right, thank you, Richard. Helen.
I'm intrigued by the people who have a significant community contribution. I wonder if you can give me some examples of what would count towards that in band 3.
Yeah, so this is people who, who do make a contribution to the community. That could be through charity work, or it could be through their job. So some people have jobs that are transferable. You could go and live in another town and carry out your job there. But if, for example, and I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but if for example, you were instrumental in running Windsor Homeless Project or the food bank or something like that, then that provides huge value to our community, and therefore that would be a consideration. That would be a factor that influences your position on the waiting list.
I will.
Thank you.
Okay, if that's all the questions, I think we have Andrew Hill, who's got his 3 minutes.
Thank you. Again, I won't need 3 minutes. A couple of questions about, it's been put to me that the armed forces criteria was lower than it was in previous allocations. I don't know if that's true, but I'd like you to comment on it. But the sort of main question I'd have is, there seems to be a criteria linked to how long you've been resident in the area. And I'm wondering how you're going to apply that to children who leave the area. You know, a common example would be going to university, for example. Does that immediately cast you as being outside the area and therefore falling off these lists? And are there perhaps there are other similar examples to that? Because I think in the equality impact assessment, it says age, no particular negative impacts. So I just wondered if you could clarify that kind of thing. I would say in general, I would think most young people now can't genuinely afford to get on the housing ladder, and therefore I would have thought there was a potential disproportionate impact on them. But perhaps you could clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. On your first question, it's a tricky one to answer, because obviously the new bands don't correspond exactly to the old bands, but the important thing to take into account is that this new top band is very small indeed. It is literally 10 to 15 households. Therefore, the new band 2 roughly corresponds to the old band A, and then the new band 3 roughly corresponds to the old band B. So the old strategy puts armed forces personnel in band B. The new one puts them in band 3, which roughly correspond to each other. So this is what I was trying to allude to earlier, is that it might feel like you're being moved down the list, but you're actually not. And that your position on the list, I'm not saying it will stay exactly the same, because obviously we're applying new criteria. You could move up the list or you can move down the list, but we're not specifically disadvantaging armed forces. On the question about local connection, I believe that being a student, that you officially you still live at home, and certainly you can vote locally, even if you're away at university. But I'm going to look at Andrew and see whether he knows the answer to that question. If not, then he's shaking his head. We'll give you a written answer, but thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you, Andrew. If we're all happy with that paper, can we agree it? Agreed. Fantastic. So John West House. Now is a part 2 item. So if we want to discuss anything on the part 2, then we'll have to do that in part 2. But hopefully we can do it all in part 1. Catherine.
Thank you. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice now. So I've got a bit of a feeling of deja vu here, because just like Mosaic, this project is one that came out of the last cabinet meeting of the previous administration in April 2023. Decision made then was to allocate funds for a much needed renovation of John West House. But unfortunately, the necessary delegation wasn't put in place to award the contract after tendering. Hence, it has to come back to Cabinet, and hence this urgent paper before you tonight. Just to give some wider context, though, as that decision was made some time ago, this project will deliver high-quality emergency accommodation for rough sleepers and homeless people, workspace, office space, communal spaces, and there's even planned permission for kennels, all under one roof. It's a really great project, and to be clear, we're not looking to change the decision made in that April 23 meeting or the budget that's been allocated. This is absolutely the right thing to do. but I am asking you to approve the paper before you tonight so that we can meet the October deadline that we've set for this project in time for winter. As you said, Simon, you know, if you've read the part 2 paper and you're happy with its contents, then we can take a vote now. Otherwise, we will need to go into part 2 and then publish the decision later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments that are part 1 related? Helen.
I think this was approved by Cabinet, as you said, in April 23. I still just don't understand why something that is so important to get people housed and it will help cost, it's taken all this time to get to this stage.
Adam. Yeah, thank you, Helen. No, I agree. This is an essential project, and it's regrettable it's taken as long as it has. I mean, there has been a couple of reasons for this. Partly to do with sort of staff turnover within the project management team, who are looking at that, which causes an unintended delay. But also, there was actually some work done to review the design to make sure there was the right mix of provision for rough sleepers and for temporary accommodation units, and that was reviewed and revised as part of that. So I think it's a better project because of that. But I share that worry. It would have been great to have seen this come to fruition for the winter we are we're in or just coming out of. But the important thing now is we make we approve this evening when I intend to vote for it, and that we make sure the project stays on track and we get it in place in time in October, in time for the cold weather months of 2025-26.
Are there any lessons to be learnt to make sure that if there are similar, or not similar projects that won't be delayed in the future? Is this something, or is it just we didn't have enough resources?
I think we should do a lessons learned evaluation. I think I wouldn't be able to tell you right now what those lessons might be, but I think it would be a good idea to do that, certainly. And we can see if there's ways of making sure things stay on track in future key projects like this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Catherine, is anything else you'd like to say, or you good? Excellent. Any other questions? Do we need to go into part 2? Got any part 2 questions? Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll agree the paper.
Agreed.
Great. Okay, that was the last item. So thank you for attending this fine cabinet meeting, and see you all soon. Bye.